I'm Christopher Epling, and I'll be guiding you today through various steps of adding your words to your finished page. We're going to be looking at some more coloring tips for putting color to your finished page, and we're also going to, at the end, be doing some more character design using the Marvel method discussed in the earlier videos. At the beginning of this art gallery workshop, students were asked to pick a theme, and the choices available to them were picture book, chapter book, comic book, and graphic novel. Now, based on the selection that they chose, students then crafted their story with the end product in mind. Picture books usually have very large illustrations on each page, very minimal words. Chapter books can be considered in the line of maybe Diary of a Wimpy Kid, has more words than a picture book. These pictures that actually included, the illustrations included inside of a chapter book would be inserted almost like bookends. You would have an illustration followed by a large paragraph or even a chapter of words, and then another illustration to follow up. It's really up to the artist how many illustrations are included in a chapter book, but the books that I've worked on in the past include maybe up to 12 or 15 for a 500-word novel. Now, comic books we all know and love. Comic books are set up in terms of panels. Now, the panels are the boxes that are on each page. All of the story, the content, the characters interacting, the words, they take place inside that box. That box is known as a panel. Students had the option of choosing a comic book or graphic novel. Now, a graphic novel is a lot similar to a comic book, but it's just much larger, hence the word novel. Comic books are a great medium for students to choose in order to express an idea, concept, or tell a story. Students are asked to think about a story differently. You see, no matter what theme a student chose, they only have a certain amount of space to tell that story in. And comics are a really great example of that. Let's say you have an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You have to fit so many panels on that page, and inside of those panels come the story. Students have to think about a story's construction, such as the introduction, which would go in the first few panels. The introduction of the characters. They would put their characters in each panel and introduce them. Some backstory. Who are they? Where they come from? What's their purpose? The antagonist or the villain in the story could be introduced. The problem. The problem is very necessary for a story, no matter what sort of theme you choose. The story is what helps the plot move along. Then there's the conflict. How is this problem or the issue that's found in the story going to be resolved? And at the end, we have the conclusion. Now, all of these parts of a story are fit into a certain amount of space. So you can imagine how difficult it might be in order to have all these certain elements within only a short amount of space, like an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Now, if you're interested in creating your own story, your own book, in the hopes of getting that published, then I highly encourage you to try. I've spoke about Ted Hudson in the past. He's a junior at Breathitt County High School. Ted's a published author now with his version or interpretation of Noah's Ark. It can be done, and you can do it, no matter what age. Now, the processes of getting a book submitted for publication, they vary. There's regional imprints or publishing houses, and then there's national publishing houses. Your choice on which way to go may be determined by the content of your story. If you have a story that's more tied to a regional atmosphere or environment, you may want to try a regional publisher. National publishers include places like Abrams Books, Amulet Books, Penguin Books, so on and so forth. Some local publishing imprints are Cloud9 Press, Bellamy Fleming Publishing, and Powell Wagner Books. All of these are great resources to look into. Just jump on the internet, Google for them. The search engine will bring up a lot of results. But before you ever even consider submitting a story for publication, first you have to have one to begin with, and that's what we're doing here during the art gallery workshop. Now, if today seems a little boring for you, adding text to the page, I really highly encourage you to go back to theholler.org and check out those early videos. Now, what we have here on the board is a box. It's a square, or more of a rectangle, really. Now, for all extensive purposes, we're going to make believe today that this box is actually a page of a book. And we're going to decide, this being our first page of our book, where our text will go. Now, authors and illustrators start out understanding exactly what the page will consist of. The page will consist of a certain amount of words. They're already predetermined. And your job is to draw something, an illustration or a depiction, showing what you think that those words mean in pictures. Okay? Now for the purpose of this, I'm going to add a box of text here. We're going to put it right here in the middle. I'm going to shorten it down some. And we're going to place text on this page, okay? So I'm going to type this out. Now this should say, once upon a time, and it does, thank goodness. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit here, place it maybe at the top in the right. There we go. Now, we'll go back to our pen. Now, as you can see, once upon a time is up in the top. It leads us off with a story. There's our story's introduction. What you would do from here is use your storyboard to go by. Now, the placement of text might sound sort of common sense. The words go on the page, and you get to kind of decide where they appear, but there's a lot of thought behind where text appears on a page. Things like don't cover your artwork. Important aspects of your artwork should not be covered by the text. Another thing you should think of is what the reader is seeing when they look through your book. How does the words appear? Not just the form or font, but their location on a page. And now I'm going to show you a few examples of this using the box we have here on the page. So let's say that we have this box, and let's say our words appear here in the top left corner. Now, if our words appear in the top left corner, we can go ahead and assume that our artwork is going to be here in the middle. Okay, and let's just go ahead and do this little guy here. And we'll give him some arms and a little belly and some feet. I really don't know what kind of creature this is, but just bear with me. All right, so let's just say he's standing on a pathway. All right. Now, the words appearing here in the top left corner help us to introduce us to the setting. Now, notice that they're not placed on top of the main character. And also, if I were to choose to place more text on this page, I may want to add those in the bottom right-hand corner. And what happens with that is that the words actually help the reader to see where to move throughout the story. You notice that the first set of words here appear in the top left corner. The second paragraph or portion of the paragraph appears in the bottom right corner. In order to continue reading the story, your eyes have to pass through the page. And when you pass through the page, you also take in the artwork. Now, elements like this is very important when deciding what it is that your book will consist of. I highly suggest thinking these things through, and there's a great book called Writing with Pictures from Yuri Shulevitz. All the concepts and different theories and placement of text all the way down to composition of page can be found on that. Now, this may be a little too advanced for some of our younger students, but the first and most important thing to remember is think about where your words will go. If you want to see examples of that, just refer to some of your favorite books. See how the author, the illustrator, or the graphic designer place the text throughout the pages. Sometimes different font is used. There's a book by Bob Shea called Dinosaur versus the Potty. Now, it's a picture book. Now, it's not geared for maybe older students, but reference that book. Look it up. Inside that book, you're going to find a few different things. There's a dinosaur, and of course, the book's on potty training. But the interesting thing about it is the graphic designer and the illustrator and the author pulled together, and they decided to use font in a really interesting way. You're going to see every style of or look of words, what we call font, throughout the book. When the dinosaur roars, the font is very bold and big in capital letters with an exclamation point. Whenever he's thinking or considering something, or maybe he's ashamed because he failed at his training, the text is very small, almost like a whisper. I want you to think of it like this. Text inside of a story, especially for picture books and chapter books, they're almost like a soundtrack to a film. If you notice when you're watching a horror film or a sci-fi film or those of you that like romance, the music is very deliberate. Pay attention to it next time, even with animation even. The choice of music really helps to set what we call the mood. It gives the viewer a certain feeling. If you want to reference something for that, I highly suggest a movie from I think it's the late 80s called Jaws. Now, I know that's a little older for some of you students, but basically it's about a big shark and he attacks guys on a small vessel in the middle of the ocean. Now, Jaws is a predator. He's under the water. And you'll notice how the composer of the music chose to depict the sound of the shark moving closer to the vessel. It leads up to the action, and you'll know exactly what I mean. Now we're going to switch over here to the table, and we're actually going to look at some examples from my books, some books that are published that I've either illustrated or I've wrote and illustrated. The first book we're going to be looking at today is called Owen Owl's Wise Words. Now, this was written by Melinda and Julia Richardson, and I illustrated this book. It actually came out this year. Now, text placement is very important. First, we're going to take consideration of the cover. Now, the cover art for Owen Owl is actually one of the pages from the interior illustrations. Notice how the cover title is at the top of the book, and the smaller title that goes along with almost as a description for the main title is smaller cap letters. So you have, excuse me, not capitalized letters, but smaller font. The actual credits for the book is down at the bottom, written by and illustrated by. So the cover of your books is just as important in terms of layout as the interior. And if we open up the pages, the first thing I want to show you is I think this is page 3 and 4 of the book. We'll open it up here to pages 3 and 4. First, we'll take a look at this page. Now, this page is actually, as you can tell, the cover of the book. Now, the text appears here in the top left corner and bottom right corner. Okay? Now, when I received this manuscript, this was all one paragraph. So the first sentence that appears up here in the top left corner was actually together with this bottom paragraph here. Now, just like I showed you on the main board a minute ago, notice that I've placed the text in opposite corners of the page, and I did that for a reason. As I was stating earlier, the viewer has to read from the top left to the bottom right, and in order to pass through the page to read this, they're crossing over the illustration. Now, what this does is actually adds an element of deliberateness to the, or if that's even a word, to the layout. It's a deliberate choice to place the text in this way because readers or viewers are going to pass through the artwork immediately to the second part. The main character is introduced. The main character is visible. According to the title, we know this is Owen. Not only does the text tell us this is Owen, but he's an owl, and the name of the book is Owen Owl's Wise Words. I'll show you a couple more examples from this book, and in particular, the page with the parrot. Now, this is a macaw parrot. There's a lot of color in this page. And if you notice, it follows a similar route as the first page with the text being separated into two portions. Okay? So when the reader starts here, in order to follow through, they're going to move over to this portion here. It allows them to see through the artwork, or pass by the artwork, I should say, and it adds to the overall effect. Now, if we move over to the next page, which is right here, if I can fit it in the screen, you're going to notice that, again, we've separated the text. Now, I want you to pay really close attention to this. The text isn't covering any of the main characters of the book. The text is off to itself, so anything that appears behind this text is not going to be heard if it's not included, especially at the bottom. When I was creating the illustrations for this book, at first the publisher was interested in why it was that I was keeping so much space on the illustrations. Now, that was a deliberate choice again because breaking this up, for one, it doesn't have all the text in one corner. It moves the viewer through the book, and it's also not covering anything important. All throughout this book, I made choices similar to that one. And if you were to flip through this book, you could see that the text is placed on or above things that will not be impacted or obscured by the text itself. Down at the bottom of this page, the text follows along the tree limb at the bottom. So every choice of a children's book is very deliberate. The next example we're going to be looking at is actually the novel I mentioned earlier. Now, this is a book that I illustrated for Matt Miller. He's a Kentucky author. This book is called There I Shall Be. Now, this is a story following short stories from Kentucky. Now, this is a novel. It's not a children's book, although children could read it if they're interested in tobacco farming and things like that. But as you can see here, there's a lot of words. There's very minimal illustrations, but ever so often, the illustrations are placed, such as here. Now, this is a very deliberate choice as well. Breaking up the story and showing various illustrations throughout helps the reader to get an idea of the environment, the setting, and the characters. There's about 12 to 15 of these drawings all throughout the book. Most of these depict different scenes from farm life, living on a farm, baling hay, raising vegetables, cattle, livestock, that sort of thing. So for a chapter book, you may include the drawings on a separate page to themselves, especially if you have a lot of words. Now the next selection that I've chosen to represent chapter books is actually for children. Now this is Irby's Turn to Rake. This was my very first book that was ever published. Irby's Turn to Rake is a children's book, 4th to 6th grade reading level. It actually won silver medal for Children's Book of the Year, 4th to 6th grade reading level. Okay, so it's a pretty neat book in terms of how it's constructed, because there's not a whole lot of books, or children's books I should say, that are both a combination of a picture book and a chapter book. In this book we have 15 chapters, but the chapters are made up of 2 pages each, so it's not that long. But I want you to notice the difference between this and Owen Owl's Wise Words. Now the first thing we see different is there's actually a chapter heading here. The chapter heading appears in the top left corner. It only appears whenever a new chapter is taking place. At the bottom of the page we see our text. Now the text is not broken up as compared to Owen Owl's Wise Words. It's at the bottom. It's all collected together. So the entire paragraph that's making up the first part of chapter 1 is below the illustration. It's in fact not even covering any portion of the illustration. And I also deliberately chose to have the illustration not extend to the corners. There's this faded old paper look to each page. Chapter books are really interesting in the way that they add a lot of detail concerning text. The story moves along through tons of descriptions and imagery. So illustrations are not, I won't say needed as much, but they're not as necessary as they are for picture books with less words and less imagery. The next example I'd like to share with you today is a small book that came out in 2013. Now, I worked with the Mosby Foundation. It's a foundation that actually helps folks that have pets to get sick and they can't afford health care for their animals. They help to pay for that health care. Now this is called Bella's Story. And it's a true story. I adopted the dog from the Jessamine County Animal Shelter. She became really sick, and this is a story about Addison's disease, and it's bringing awareness of Addison's disease in canines. Now this is much different than the first 2 examples that I showed you, or 3 examples I showed you. Technically this is a picture book, but there's tons of text in here. It's not broken up into any chapters, but there's more words. So you could even say, if you wanted to, that all the illustrations take place inside these boxes. These boxes are considered panels in comics, but for the purpose of this book, this isn't a comic book or a graphic novel. You could incorporate different elements from different styles of themes of books and create your own version. There's no real set rules to this, but there are certain guidelines that you have to adhere to in order to create a book that falls into a certain category. Now for Bella's Story, the words appear similar to Irby's Turn to Rake. They're below the artwork. They're also included inside a box for each page as well. This story here follows Bella through her diagnosis of Addison's disease all the way up to getting treatment. The next example I'd like to share with you is a book that came out in 2014. It's titled Salt. Now, that's a weird name for a book, I know, and if the little astronaut kind of looks like me on the cover, then there's a good reason. This is an autobiographical comic strip, a collection of the first year's worth of comic strips produced on a website called saltwebcomic.com. And I'll tell you a little background about this as we flip through it. When I first started visiting schools, I noticed that there weren't a whole lot of comic strips for young Christians. Now that's something that I wanted to change, and I created Salt based on the need that I saw for this, okay? And I'm a Christian, and this follows Matthew 5:13 is where the name comes from. Now the reason I wanted to share this with you is that this isn't a graphic novel, and the reason for that is that each page is self-contained. Each page is its own comic strip. There's 63 of these in this book. But I want you to notice how I've used text and words on the pages. Now these boxes here that appear inside boxes are called narration boxes. It's the narrator of the story. If the characters aren't speaking, the story has to move along somehow. Now, you don't have to have words with comics or pictures. The pictures alone can tell the story, but if there is narration, then they appear inside these boxes with comics. Now, another example of this is going to be word balloons. Word balloons are used throughout comics to depict communication between characters. There's various ways to use different types of word balloons. The borders change when depicting maybe a different tone of voice. Sometimes you may have seen the borders appear squiggly when someone's nervous. And also sounds. There's no sounds in comics, so you have to choose how to actually incorporate sound through the text on the page. Now, comic artists in the late 50s and early 60s, all the way up to the early 70s, they used mostly what's called an Ames lettering guide in order to lay down the text. Now, all the text in this book was done through a word processor. So I use Photoshop, but there's Microsoft Word, there's Pages for all of you using the iOS devices, the Apple products. Pages is the word processor for that. So you have a couple of options. You can type the text onto a program and then insert it into these boxes, or you hand letter. Now when you hand letter, and I went over this today in our school presentation, when you hand letter for a comic, it's good to be very careful. An Ames lettering guide was something that was used to help cartoonists understand the space between the words. They would lay this device down, and if you want to see what one looks like, you can either Google it or watch the Session 1 video from Paintsville High School today. But this Ames lettering guide would do just what I'm doing here on the page in an easier fashion. It separates individual lines that would appear inside of a word balloon. So you have this space here is the word balloon. The Ames lettering guide creates lines for you to go by. This helps when you're hand lettering because you would add the text here. So your words would appear inside, and you could follow writing on top of the lines, kept them uniform and that kind of thing, okay? So the Ames lettering guide is very, very important. Other things that you can use are stencils. Now stencils are really helpful when creating comics or any types of drawings. I like to use this for perfect circles. There's different shapes and things you can buy with stencils. In Pikeville here, we have Hobby Lobby, which has a lot of different types of tools and devices for young artists or any artist. Also this for angles. We did a video earlier, I think it was in session 2 or 3, and you can check those out on theholler.org on perspective. And the first thing that we did was we used the railroad tracks. So we had the line of perspective here, and then we had railroad tracks that would come from our line of perspective, moving further or closer to, I should say, the viewer. And what this does is it helps the artist understand the use of perspective in drawing. So you can see how the railroad tracks go off into the distance here, and these little angles help to get these lines just right instead of using a gigantic ruler to do it each time. Angles are great for this, and they're really cheap too. You can find them, you know, any Walmart or craft store or any place that sells different types of tools for artists. Okay. Now while we're here and we have the camera set up in order to see drawings, I'm going to pull a page out that I started, I think it was 2 sessions ago, and we have Tim the Tiger. I'm not sure if you remember this, but we used this to talk about color. Now colored pencils have been issued to schools, and if you haven't received your colored pencils, then please send me a message on the holler. That way we can make sure that they get out to you. They have been provided to all of the KVEC representatives in your district, so you can either check with them directly or contact me and I'll ask them for you, okay? But Tim the Tiger here was colored using the same exact colored pencils that were sent out to the schools, or should be sent out to the schools by now. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about color just for a second before we move on to more character design work. Color is really important no matter if you're doing working with colored pencils or if you have a choice of your own. Maybe you've decided to use watercolor. whenever you're applying color to your page, now at this point we've already penciled our page out, we've outlined the important parts of it, but when you're applying color to the page, you should be very deliberate in how you do that, and also build upon color. Try mixing different colored pencils on top of one another. We talked about the use of light when coloring. You have a light source here, and that's the sun. Whenever you're starting to lay down color, think about where your light source, if there is any, where that light source is coming from. How would that change how the drawing is put together, okay? So I'm really interested in seeing what young artists are putting together. If you'd like to share some of your work, please go on to theholler.org and share your work with us there. All right? And again, staying inside the lines is very important too, obviously. Basically what you've done, once you've penciled your page and you've outlined it, is you've created for yourself your very own coloring book, or your coloring page, right? Now, I've had some students to ask me if they can use collages or pictures that they have taken for their book, and that's fine. But if your hopes are to get it published one day, such as Ted Hudson, then I really suggest that you try to illustrate your book, draw your book based on your own interpretation of your story through your drawings, okay? All right, now to see how to apply color and what we've done so far, please check out, I think it's the Art Gallery Workshop Video 3, and the instructions on that will be provided for you. But with the time remaining, I've had a lot of questions that come through for students based on the character building phase, or the fleshing out of your character. So for the purpose of this, I want to actually revisit the Marvel method for a little bit and show you a few more methods on how to create or build your character using that Marvel method. The Marvel method, as we've talked about in videos in the past, is using circles and shapes and as a framework for your final drawing. Now, for the purpose of this, when I first started, it was just showing you how to apply those and build a skeleton. Today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at posture and how to build a framework for a character that is a little more animated than just a character standing and looking at the viewer. So I'm going to be drawing this figure here that looks sort of worried, and when I look at this figure, I can tell right away that I'm going to need a circle that's going to represent the top of the head here, okay? This is the head of our character. Now notice this character has a very small neck going down, so I'm going to use a small oval to represent the neck, even a small oval to represent the shoulders. Now you can tell already that this is following a similar style or shape as the character we're drawing here, okay? I've got ovals for the arm, and this artist has chosen to depict the arms in these very long oval shapes with not a whole lot of bend to the elbows, as you can see here. I don't know if any of you watching are familiar with the character known as Finn from Adventure Time, but when I first saw this character here and decided we would try it out, I thought that it resembled Finn a lot. All right, so we have almost the basic shape of this character, adding circles for feet. So now we could go ahead and grab the black and zoom in a little bit and start to put our detail in and see what happens, okay? I'm going to move him over here in the middle of the page so we can see it a little bit better and go from there. Okay. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a portion of this character I'm referencing, and I'm going to start at a certain point. I'm going to start at the ear and adding detail. Now, if you were drawing this character out at home, you would want to keep in mind that this is done with pencil still. I know it seems as though I'm, with the black, it looks like I'm using a marker, but you would still want to be using a pencil, because what happens is at the end of this you would have to go back and you'd have to erase, okay? So we're going to add our detail into our figure, and you would trace over this at the end with the pen and erase those pencil lines out. Now, the Marvel method is one of many methods out there to get shapes down, okay, for certain drawings and such. And you'll notice that while I'm drawing these characters, I'm changing it a little bit. I'm not sticking exactly to what I see. I may change it a whole lot. I may add different hairstyles to characters. It just really depends on what I want to do with the characters available to me, okay? So you don't have to draw something exactly the way you see it. If there's anything you want to change, then change it. There's no real set rules to this. Now for the characters that you've created yourself, you have a lot of liberty there. You can add just about anything in the world you want to it. You can make it look however you want, put it in any type of posture that you want it to be in, or it's completely up to you. Notice I'm just following these circles. See the space that I left out for the arm right there. I did that because I'm going to go back in a little bit and include it in there. The whole time I'm referencing the image that I'm looking at if I'm drawing off something. And if you're coming up with something just out of the blue, then like I said, you have a lot of liberty with that. So here we have his hand. He's pretty worried about something. And you can actually show emotion through your characters by how their posture appears. We talked about facial expressions in one video. That's one way to show emotion. But the posture also really helps the viewer to understand what sort of emotion your character is feeling. Now there's tons of ways to go about this. You don't have to follow one set rule when it comes to this. But it's good to know your options. And if you like these videos, and let's say you want to see more of them, and they're really helping you in your craft and building your craft, then go ahead and search for more videos online. There's tons of stuff available for you. Now you notice that there were no laces on the character to the right, but I've added laces to him. Okay. Now there's a few changes that I would have made to this, maybe more hair, things like that, but you get the idea of how this works. So we've used those circles to create that shape. Is it exactly like that? No, but you can get the idea of how to build it. Now, I do want to touch on one more thing. I've had a few questions on hairstyles, believe it or not, for characters. You know, when you're personalizing your character, you're going to have all sorts of different looks to them. And so let's talk a little bit about different hairstyles. Now you'll notice when I'm going to create this for you here, I'm going to use a circle. Okay, and the circle again is just following that Marvel method. It just gives us a framework to work on. One thing that I always keep in mind whenever I'm drawing hair on a character is to keep your pen, and I'm using a digital pen here. It works a lot different than what a pen or pencil would be on paper, a whole lot different. And I'll be honest with you, I'm getting used to it still. And I like some things about it and other things I'm not real sure. But we'll work with it and see what happens. So what I mean by keeping your pencil sort of loose on the page is when you're drawing hair, now this is one way to do it. There's many different ways. But you barely apply down and make very light marks. You know, you don't have to follow every single edge of this hairline here doesn't have to be a certain way or perfect. So adding these, it's almost like scribbles at the bottom, you see, just adds effect to it. And I'm actually going to go ahead and do another one here for you. Now all of these examples are being done from the perspective of the character looking at us, okay, except from the side. We're not doing it from the side right now. So hair would appear different, of course, if you're looking at the side of a person's head as compared to the front of the head. So for this one, we're doing the one with the braids. Okay, so we'll draw the braids coming down. Now you notice how I'm just sketching this out. I'm not trying to be very technical about each and every little braid that's on this little girl's hair here. We're just sketching those out pretty lightly, okay? Go ahead and do another one. Hairstyles on characters are important. They add personality to the character. There's tons of different ways to go about doing it. Like I said, there's millions of different hairstyles, I guess, too. So it really just depends on what you want for your character. Now here we have a ponytail. It's coming down. Okay. And so you can see all the various ways to depict hair. I'll draw a couple more and then we'll move on. Let's see. Find another one here. Yeah, I like this one over here. This will work. So again, draw the circle. A circle acts as your framework, or an oval, I should say. All right, and go ahead and add the ears first this time. And this hair will be parted in the middle here, over the top here. And you notice that I'm drawing on top of my framework. I'm not following the edge of that circle exactly, okay? And again, with the very light lines to the hair, you don't want to have to make every single shape that appears at the bottom, very, very technical, okay? So hair should be kept loose. I've seen some cartoonists draw hair like this, where it's just sorts of, jaggedly lines going every which direction. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. There's different cartooning styles, so whatever works best for you, that's what you should work with, okay? Now the Marvel method is great for various types of cartooning. We've went over some pretty basic cartoons right now, but here are some examples if you were to draw something a little more elaborate. An illustrator that has been very influential in my career has been Mark Wayne Adams, and I'm not really sure if you haven't heard of him, then I highly suggest you look his work up. He worked for Disney. He owns a company called MWA Inc. right now, and he's out of Florida. And his style of art, though, while I'm mentioning him, his style of art is very animated, and what I mean by that is similar to what you're seeing here, okay? So we're going to go ahead and try to use this Marvel method to draw this lady over here on the side, okay? Now you notice this is totally different than what we're seeing here, but once we go back and we start to add that detail in, hopefully we could see how this would change a little bit. So all this does is to serve as your framework. That's it. Okay? That's the only reason that we're doing it. We're creating this to serve as our framework. So we'd go back then. Here's the hair example again. Okay, I'm going to put the ear here. Styles of cartooning vary. If you can handle anime or manga type stuff, then that's wonderful. If you like drawing in that style, then by all means draw what you like to look at yourself. Okay, manga might be a little harder for some, or anime might be difficult for some. Think of Calvin and Hobbes versus anime type drawing. It's completely different, right? See how I'm using my framework again to put the detail in here? I'm just going very loose and keeping it somewhat to the shape I'm looking at, but I'm not following these lines perfect because they serve only to guide me. That's it. They're just guiding your hand or your pen or your line as you create the shapes, okay? I will leave the hand for a second and come back to it. Remember what we talked about with clothing? Clothing hangs on an individual. It's not stuck to the skin usually. If you're drawing something that's realistic, it's not. And again, you could think of Adventure Time. Adventure Time, has the clothing that's actually stuck to the body. So you may do it that way if you want to. That's fine. Okay. So this comes up, the clothing here. Okay, I got the other arm here. And it looks like we have just about everything we need, and we can start adding the details to the face now, okay? So let's zoom in a little bit so we can get the face down. All right, that should be good enough. So again, you know, we talked about using this center line down the face to help us understand where the nose will be and the eyes, and this works really good for doing realistic type drawings. But if you notice what we were doing to the left here, that's not too realistic. So what I'm going to do is actually include this in just to help guide me, the blue lines, but it's not something that you absolutely have to have, okay? Alright, so now we have, this hair actually comes down a little bit more on the face, I think. Now that I'm looking at it a little closer, let me do the nose first. And it goes up, down. Okay, and she's got a big smile, so it's going to go all the way up here and bring that up into the nose area. Now this is a little bit similar style to the elderly lady that we did in a video in the past. So if you want to go back and let's say you like more detail in your artwork, reference those early videos. We talk a little bit more about that in this, okay? So we're going to put the eye here, another eye up here, the eyeball, the pupil, I should say. Okay, and then this is going to go up, down, and this comes down to the nose and her cheek up here. So it's something like that. Right now, let's take a look at the hand. Hands are, you know, it takes a lot of practice, and believe me, drawing digitally is a lot different than using pen and paper. I'm not, you know, I wish I could master both worlds, but I'm trying. But I really love using digital. It's the coolest thing ever. So we're going to draw our hand coming out. My tips for drawing hands is start at one area, one location, and draw exactly what you see. Now you notice I started with the thumb and then went straight to her pinky. And what that enables me to do is I've set up what I need then to add the rest of the fingers on here, okay? And I'm changing it up a little bit than what it looks like. So there we go. Something like that right there, okay? All right, so same thing goes for the other hand. This one is actually bent towards the body. The wrist goes up. Now notice I'd make this one straight line all the way up to here to do one finger. See how I've done that? And then I stop. You can only see a little bit of the thumb here, and then the other fingers are going to come right out and follow this one. Alright. I may change this one up a little bit too. Something like that. Okay? So there we have the other hand. Now, using the Marvel method to draw characters will help you in understanding composition and things. Highly suggest you look at other resources available to you on the internet. Go to YouTube, search up how to draw, and then whatever it is you're looking for. One thing we haven't covered very much in the workshops, and hopefully we can in the future, especially through Pike TV, and that's how to draw things like cars or automotives, and even going into buildings and even different landscapes too. So that's really important. I'd like to thank KVAC for making this portion of the art gallery possible for the students. And again, if you're watching this video on Pike TV and this is something that you would like to get involved with creating and sharing your own stories along with your illustrations, whether it's picture books, comics, graphic novels, or chapter books, you can jump onto the holler.org and look for the art gallery. You have to register, create a username, password, and you can start to look up the resources available. Share some of your work. If you want to contact me, you can. My email address is Epling, it's my last name, E-P-L-I-N-G, EplingIllustrations@gmail.com. You can also go and check out my website at ChristopherEpling.com. Thanks so much for joining us today. I hope that you've had a good time, maybe learned a couple things while we've talked about construction of your picture book, chapter book, graphic novel, or comic book. See you in the classroom.